Hey, Paul, Mr. Al.
Hey, hey Rick, that's a
Hey guys, we're still getting it up on YouTube. I think we are live. I'll let Darren confirm
Yeah,
that.
I see a grid of all of us here on YouTube. So we are live.
Sweet. I will switch into speaker mode so that we can see each other's faces a little better. It's good to see everybody. So we've had a little hiatus in office hours while Rick and I have been out gallivanting all over the place with groups of photographers having a good time photographing. Well, and David and I and our good friend Dennis in Costa Rica. It's been a pretty exciting time.
Yeah,
Rick, do you want to give a
Charleston
little?
seems like forever ago,
I know,
and
and it wasn't
Mazatlan.
very
It was
long
like I
ago.
can't even remember. It's like I barely remember the fact that we were in Mazatlan.
It's been a little bit of a blur, and it's been a fun ride. I mean, we had an amazing time in Mazatlan for the total eclipse, and we had a great time in Charleston photographing wildlife, and then Costa Rica was nuts. It was really off the hook. What a
Yeah,
great trip.
sorry
Um,
I missed it.
yeah, yeah, you were missed. You were
Yeah,
missed, but we had a really wonderful time. And I had a blast with the big new toy that I was fortunate enough to be able to take down there. And it was interesting. It's such a cool time for photographers. I feel like, I think back to the days, as I was coming up in photography, you had these dedicated wildlife and sports photographers who had these huge lenses and monopods or gimbals, the 400 and the 600 f4s and even the 800 5.6s, and they were monsters, and they were expensive like this lens, but there was no way to handhold them. They came in steamer trunks. And on this workshop, we had people shooting with the amazing Nikon 500 PF from the F mount days on FTZ adapters with Z8s and Z9s. We had people with the new PF lenses, the 400, the 600, the 800. That 400 takes teleconverters really well. We had people with the 180 to 600 millimeter lens. We had people with the 100 to 400 millimeter lens. We had Fuji shooters with APS-C shooting with their glass that's, the 100 to 300, I think, which equals 200 to 600. We had Sony shooters with that amazing 400 2.8, which is significantly smaller than this lens, but doesn't have the built-in teleconverter, about the same price. There's something just really special with this lens of being able to flip that teleconverter and suddenly be 560 f4. And then in low light, if you need a little more reach, you can flip to APS-C with the Z9 or the Z8 with a button press, and all of a sudden you're still shooting 20 megapixels like the D500 did. You're just cropping in on the sensor, and you still have that 2.8 depth of field and light gathering ability. So, I mean, this did feel a bit like cheating in the rainforests of Costa Rica, but all that glass was amazing, and it ranges from quite affordable. That 180 to 600 is a really nice performing lens. The 500 PF can be had for a huge discount now in the S class day. And when we were in Charleston, the same thing. We saw a lot of different
yeah.
glass from a lot of different brands, and I feel like it's just a wonderful time to be a photographer. The tools have gotten so hand holdable, smaller, lighter. There's more choices at every price point. It's an exciting time.
So I think most people probably at least saw that you did an ATS on the Costa Rica trip with Dennis and David.
I did, yeah. If people
And
haven't seen that, there's a
so,
there's a good 6-minute clip of sort of highlights from that.
yeah. So one of the things that I've been working on the last month or so is we're starting to look at the 2025 workshop list, and I think we're gonna next office hours will be June 18th, and we'll roll out what all of the workshops for 2025, and do sort of a general Q&A. We got a lot of great questions that were sort of outside the Lightroom sphere, and we'll save those questions for next times, and you can add new ones. It just sort of be sort of general Q&A. But we can say right now that we have firmed up the beginning of next year's schedule, the spring schedule. And we're going to do Death Valley and Joshua Tree in late February, early March. Those are two separate workshops. We'll also be doing one print workshop in February and probably another one either mid-year, or we're also looking at possibility of doing one this November. We're just sort of checking the schedule on that sort of stuff. And then we've also committed to a Costa Rica workshop again next year. We've got, I mean, the waiting list for Costa Rica and Scotland is huge. So we hadn't originally planned to do Costa Rica next year, but we will be doing it. So
well, and it was so much fun, and David and I spent some time exploring some new options and some different things, even some different places to stay. So we're kind of working on creating a little bit of a new experience with some more stuff in Costa Rica. So
yeah. So like I said, the June 18th office hours will roll out the schedule with all the dates and everything. I imagine that the Death Valley and Joshua Tree and print workshops will probably go live they'll go live before the next office hours. So if you're interested in any one of those 4 workshops, so printing, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, and Costa Rica, send me an email. That's rick@hudsonhenry.com, rick@hudsonhenry.com, and tell me which workshops you're interested in. And then what we'll do is I'll send out an email before the workshops get posted in the store with a time that they go live. So anyway,
and I'll also just point out that we're timing the Death Valley and Joshua Tree workshops to be able to do some Milky Way work too, some early 2025 Milky Way work, and those are spectacular places to do it. We had so much fun last time.
So I think that's about it for the workshop stuff. Anything else on your end?
No, I think we're slotted to talk a fair bit about the development of photo editing and organizing software, particularly in Adobe land today. And I think it's become complicated, bifurcated, a bit controversial, and confusing to a lot of people who don't track this for a living and who haven't been sort of enmeshed and embroiled in what's going on there. I think that the rise of Lightroom CC to Adobe's push kind of caught me unaware a little bit. I mean, I've been a Lightroom user since version 1 came out. You know, I was and like Rick, I mean, I used to scan negatives and positives in the film days and edit those in Photoshop, you know, 4. I think I came into it at maybe Photoshop 3 or 4 back in the days when you bought the software and had the suite on your desktop. There were all the different colored boxes with depending on what products you needed. You could get Dreamweaver and Photoshop, and then there were all these companies that were plugins like the precursor to On1, Genuine Fractals, and the PhotoKit sharpeners, and all these different plugins. And then Adobe came out with Lightroom, and it was kind of revelatory. You know, it had a lot of power for organizing your images in a database and tracking and customizing collections of images from multiple folders and creating virtual copies of the same, particularly as we got into raw editing. I mean, it just became this wonderful way to view your raw edits without creating another file. And you could create multiple versions with different edits of the same raw file without even creating another space on your hard drive. And then they brought in the print module, and it became so much easier for me personally to print with that than it was in Photoshop. I thought it was a wonderful system, particularly when they brought soft proofing into it. And I've just evolved with it from version 1 to where we are now, building a huge library. I have nearly 400,000 images from 1993 to 2024 in one big catalog, which resides on this little, 2 terabyte SSD. It's only about 300 megabytes, that whole database catalog. It doesn't have the images. It's just all the information about how I have organized and edited those, and it ties it to what hard drive is it on? Is it on my big network attached storage drive? Is it on my internal hard drive on the computer? Is it on some other SSD that I've got? It looks for those drives. It'll still show me the images if they're not there. I can still work with them if I create virtual copies of them to work with on the road without even having the files. It's been a tremendous tool for me, and it lets me do a tremendous amount of organizing, along with a great raw processor, essentially Adobe Camera Raw. And it lets me take my entire library on the field, even if I don't have the files with me, even if I don't have those nearly 20 terabytes of, I guess I have about 16 terabytes now of photos on my network attached storage.
Yeah, I'm
And
10.
you're 10 terabytes, right?
Yeah.
So for those of us with extensive file collections, that ability to organize, to keyword images, I put my photos in folders like Africa 2007, has 6,000 images in it. And as I edit those, I create star ratings, and there might be different folders in there. Rwanda, has gorilla trips, and Zanzibar has this exotic island and snorkeling and beach stuff, and then Safari has all the stuff in Ngorongoro Crater and Lake Mingyar and all that stuff. But if I love an image in there, it gets starred to 3 stars, and I might keyword it zebra if it's of a zebra or an elephant, and I can literally click on all photos in Lightroom Classic and say in the grid view, I want to sort by text, and any text has Africa 3 stars, zebra. Here comes every image from every trip I ever took to Africa that I graded 3 stars and keyworded zebra. I don't have to go looking for a folder at all. It's just organized for me. And now, Lightroom has come up with this cloud-based system where they're going to do that for you through AI, or Adobe has come up with that, and they're really pushing it hard. But the catch is, to really utilize all that organizing power, you have to put the images in the cloud.
Yeah.
From my perspective. And
Right.
that may work well
and
for some people with small collections. And
yeah, I think, I've spent a fair amount of time over the years with, as our friend Harris calls it, the cloudy version of Lightroom CC. And that's basically the desktop version, either the Windows or the Mac version. The Lightroom that's on tablets and phones is really a cloud-based system that will work with either Classic or Lightroom CC. But I've known the Adobe guys forever. I'm not as close to them. A bunch of the product managers are gone now, but I knew them well back at the beginning of both Classic and when they announced CC. And I can tell you that the number one complaint they got from users was not really understanding importing, not really understanding the concept of the catalog and what it did. And so when they came out with CC, it had it's iterated over time to the point where it has all of the general developed features that we have. They're presented a little differently in some ways. A more streamlined UI, I would say.
in the cloud.
And in the cloud, right. And for them, the whole thing was we're going to put everything in the cloud. And, when they started this, my first response to it was, unless you give me some way to selectively choose which files go into the cloud, I'm not interested. And that's kind of been my take all along with it. I mean, there's a bunch of things about it that I will not make me change to it now. The biggest one is cost, right? So I've got 10 terabytes. It's $10 a month per terabyte to put those files in the cloud. So that's $100 a month that I'm going to pay. And
$160 a month for me.
Yeah. And it's a lot of the things that I've come to over the years that are really important to me. Printing. I rename all of my files. because that to me is the beginning of the organization process, you know.
Yep.
And the you know, like I said, the biggest problem that people had was the import window in Lightroom Classic. And I can tell you that I probably had hundreds of Zoom sessions and phone calls over the years with people trying to walk them through that. I get that it's, especially when you're starting out, it's really hard to sort of discern what's going on, and it's easy to make mistakes. But you know, so their response with CC is, it's like there's no longer an import button. There's a add photos, and basically what it does is you say add photos, and it says show me a folder, and it sucks them in and shoots them up to the cloud. It doesn't remove the files from your hard drive. And so if you want to have a sort of basic backup system, you know, you can use sort of the way that we do things now, where you have drives, you know, with folders on them that you've got your files in. The difference is that when you work that way with Classic, and you have the XMP data saved with those files, everything gets backed up, including your edits. Whereas the only place your edits are backed up is in the cloud. And that's a pretty big thing for me. You know, so if you decide that you no longer want to be part of the Adobe ecosystem, you know, the only way you can get your files back is literally to download them all as originals and settings. So, you know, I mean, there's some things, but for some people, that doesn't matter. For some people, it is actually, you know, so you have a couple terabytes of photos, you put them all up in the cloud, you're not spending that much more money, you know, and you know, they're all there and you can find them. And the search stuff in Lightroom CC is pretty cool, because everything's up in the cloud. So it's analyzing your files in the cloud, and you know, it's using its sort of basic image search function to do things like, you know, you can search for Eiffel Tower, and if you've got pictures of the Eiffel Tower, they will show up there. You know,
it's a lot like Google Photos or like Apple Photos.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, but anyway, I think a lot of people have sort of gotten the sense that okay, you know, I got to either throw everything in the cloud, or I've got to deal with the, you know, for some people, the mess that is Lightroom Classic and the organizational tool. I would argue that once you get it and you follow a system, it's pretty straightforward to get in there. But anyway, how we got to this place where we're talking about it is that just a few months ago, well, last 6 months ago, Adobe announced that they now had a way for you to manage folders of photos locally, that they didn't have to go into the cloud. And that got a whole bunch of people excited, because they're like, oh, wow, I could selectively put what's in the cloud and what's not in the cloud. And I played with it. And to be honest, I looked at it and I was like, this is not for me. And just sort of left it. And I had a couple of people in workshops ask about it. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't go that way. And what was it, like 3 months ago, Matt, our good friend Matt, basically said, you know, he broke the internet, or at least the photography side of the internet, by announcing that he was done with Classic and he was using the Lightroom CC was the future. And, you know, that set off a whole bunch of stuff. And I went back and I sort of played around with what he was talking about, with respect to Classic, the local and it's still not great, to me, you know.
Well, to me, when I played with it, and you can chime in, I found that it allows you to do basic editing of the files that you store locally, but they're not in any way interlinked with what you put in the cloud in CC. They're a separate system. You'd have a local set of files, and then what you put in the cloud, they don't see each other. And there's no way to create collections or to do the advanced organizing that you would do in Lightroom Classic, because there's no database. And it also won't even let you see all of the photos in subfolders. It's only the folder you've clicked on.
Yeah.
Like a basic browser.
have either of you messed with syncing smart previews from Classic out
Yeah, and
to?
I'll talk about that actually in a bit. I wanted to do
Okay, cool.
just a short demo because that's one of the things that's caused a lot of confusion over the years since Adobe announced CC. There've been things, well, does this mean Classic's going away? Can I use both at the same time? What are the mobile applications? How do they work with this? I mean, it creates all of this confusion that Adobe really hasn't done much to clarify.
To dispel.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that, but I did want to show just sort of so people could get a sense of what this local tab is and where things are different. You know, I'm not going to do a Lightroom CC demo just because I think there's stuff that's different, but the basic develop module that you have in Classic is there in CC. They're identical. When Adobe updates, this morning they added a generative fill content aware as a technology preview in both Lightroom CC and Lightroom Classic. So now, the remove tool has a bunch of checkboxes for, doing generative AI. But I think we all know that that's sort of going to come at some point. But, in terms of working with images, CC and Classic are really pretty much the same. It really comes down to the library module and how you organize things in Classic and how you don't in CC. So do you want to let me share, and I'll just do a quick show. I'm just going to show what
You should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can.
All right. Okay. So does everybody see? So this is Lightroom CC.
Yeah.
Let me close my little Zoom window here. And this is the cloud. So you now have two tabs in CC. You've got cloud, which is all of my cloud photos. And I'll talk about what they are in a minute. And then you've got this local tab, which basically, you can go in and you can say, okay, I want to look at this photo sets folder. And, one of the things that Hudson talked about before was, that it can't even see within multiple folders within a folder, like you literally have to work in each one. But it works well. I mean, once you're in this and you can select an image, you can go in and choose edit, and boom, you're editing it. You're going in and working on this, and it saves an XMP file to your drive into the folder where the files are. I mean, it is developed, okay, as we see. The thing is that if you wanted to, so Adobe Lightroom CC, they changed the nomenclature and a bunch of things. One of them is collections are now albums in Lightroom CC. There are no smart collections and no smart albums in the current version of Lightroom CC. You can't save filter sets like you can in Lightroom Classic, where you can say, do some very complicated searches and then save that as a search that you use over and over again. They come with some stock ones that are built in, but you can't create those on your own right now. So
there's no printing.
Right. In printing, you can go to Photoshop to print, although I would prefer not to anymore, even though that was my, I was one of the people who stuck with Photoshop printing longer than I needed to.
That's one thing I was able to have an influence on you for the positive there.
Yes, it was one of the few, but anyway, so you get this. I have all of these other photos on these drives on my local system, and I can edit them. I can do things. But let's say you want to share that. You want to put that in the Lightroom CC. Right? Well, the only way to do that is literally you have to copy it to the cloud. You say copy one file to the cloud. You can add it to an album, okay, in the cloud. And, you get this, the photo and all the edits made to this point will be copied and synced to the cloud. Okay. And it, it, it now literally lives in the cloud from an editing standpoint. Okay. You can sort of sync it back, but it's not automatic like it is in Classic, where if I go in and I make a bunch of edits, I make a version, or a snapshot, that stuff doesn't go, so it's
Well, so if I hear you right, there's a copy in the cloud that you can edit, but it won't sync to your local, and there's a copy in local that you
right.
can edit, but it won't sync to the cloud now. It's like these
Yeah.
two systems talk. Yeah.
And the thing. So here, I like I said, I didn't really want to go too far on the screen sharing, but the thing is that it's Adobe sort of created this bifurcated system where you've got the cloud version with all of your photos in the cloud, and then you've got this local version so you can edit stuff. And if you were like, well, I'm sick and tired of Classic, I've got my photos locally on my drive and I only want some of them in the cloud, I mean, you can all over the place. To be really thoughtful about how you're going to organize stuff, how you're going to get edits back. Where are the originals? I mean, this is the nice thing, right? You never have to worry about where your originals are once you've got your organizational structure set up.
So I'll play devil's advocate here and take the cynical view for a second, which is, okay, they got a lot of complaints from people about cataloging. People didn't understand that you need to import your files into the database structure and that you can't move them outside of the database structure, or else the database loses track of where they are and you get these file is missing messages. And they were dealing with customer complaints about that a lot. So they created, to their credit, they created a system that's simpler where people upload the photos, they take care of all that and add in niceties like search and everything. But also there's a business model which Google and Apple have taken grand advantage of. We now have 50 megapixel sensors in my cell phone, which, creates these huge files, and they get stored unless I change my defaults automatically in Google Photos. And all of a sudden they're saying, well, you've hit the next terabyte threshold and we want more money every month to store these files. And Adobe sees that business model too, with all of our cameras leaping up to 60 megapixels and 40 megapixels. And, those are big files. And if they push for everything to be in the cloud and add all of the cool features only to what's in the cloud, people are going to wind up buying more and more cloud storage. And over time, their collections are going to get larger and larger. And people as a whole tend to not be good at culling. And wind up, suddenly running out of room. And instead of going back and doing the work of culling, they're just going to buy more storage. And so as a business model, it works really well. And if we push this, we'll make more money. And if we give a bunch of influencers unlimited cloud storage space and load it with features, they'll be selling it. But they got complaints from people saying, but I want to be able to keep my files local. Well, so they bolt on this local files thing where you can see and do some editing locally too if you want, but it's completely separate from all the cool features. So you'll want to be moving those files into the cloud to be able to get all the search and the cataloging type features that you'd have in Lightroom Classic if you learn to use cataloging with your files. I mean, that's kind of my cynical view of it, is that it's a little bit of potentially a money grab, maybe.
There's definitely part of that. There are bean counters inside Adobe that are trying to drive service revenue, which is what storage is, right? I mean, everybody's doing it. And I had a conversation not long after CC came out with Tom Horgody, who was the product manager for Lightroom at that time. And he was asking about, CC, and I told him that, for as long as I could see that I had to put every image of mine that I wanted in the cloud, it was not a product that I was going to use. And he said that they knew that was a common complaint, and it was one of the reasons why they were so emphatic that Classic was not going away. Was because there are certain categories of users who want selective. They want to share their stuff to the cloud, their way. I believe, and a lot of the stuff we've seen in CC has been similar to the stuff that we've seen in the last year and a half with the AI stuff in Photoshop. I mean, Adobe is doing a lot of technology previews. They do a lot of stuff where they're sort of continually updating products. I think that part of what the local tab in CC is a first step towards how do you manage something like this all the way around. I can't believe that they would allow you not to have multi-folder search. I mean, that was the first thing when I saw the local tab, because I've got all of these folders of photos in it, and I just pointed at it, my 2013 folder, and just said, find this, and it kept saying, well, there's no photos with that, in it, and I'm like, there are, and that was like, oh, duh, I have to literally go to that folder. I can't believe that they're going to let that.
For people who use subfolders by day on trips, you'd have to find the right day in your file structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think, at some point, Lightroom CC will get smart albums. They'll get a bunch of those features that I've come to depend upon. But let's just say I decided I'm going to start today, and everything I do from today goes into the cloud. Well, I'm going to have, before I even get to the point where I add photos in Lightroom CC, I'm going to have to rename. I'm going to have to find something that's going to rename all the files. I'm going to use another utility to do it. Whereas right now, Bridge will do it. Actually, I've got a wonderful utility called the Better Finder Rename for the Mac OS that is great, and I would use that. But that's one more thing I have to do before I can even ingest, because I want my files to have names that I can get a sense of what it is and when it was. So I think they will fix the local tab. It will improve over time. Whether it improves enough that I'm happy with it, I don't know.
I feel like for me, I would need printing. I would need the print engine ported over, and I would need an integration where there are files that are in the cloud, but I can see that they're in the cloud on my local drives, and it's one system that I would have the organizing power of. That would be wonderful. That would be great.
Well, and so, one of the questions that came up quite a bit in, for today from people is, well, how do I use the cloud features while still using Classic? And, if that, all of those photos that you saw in my Lightroom CC are actually albums that I've shared, I've synced to the cloud with Lightroom Classic. And that's really the first step in that. You can't sync smart collections to the cloud, but you can sync any other collection to the cloud.
Right.
And I'll go do a workshop, and I'll take all of those folders, all those photos, and I'll put them into an album that then gets synced to the cloud. It's pretty easy to do. There's, you just have to, you can only sync one catalog at a time. But it's possible. And then when you if you edit those photos on, like if I edit them in Lightroom on my iPad, those trickle some of it. And I can do things like I can, on my phone, if I shoot with the Lightroom camera, all of those photos go into my Lightroom catalog, because I have it's considered a mobile photo. And actually, let me show you this. Let me just show that one.
I don't usually use the Lightroom camera, but with my normal Google Pixel 8 Pro camera, all the photos because I have Lightroom mobile running, they all get synced to Lightroom. They're on my Lightroom Classic on either my PC or my Apple back there. Whenever I fire up the Lightroom catalog, there's the mobile photos and they just sync. It's as long as I'm on Wi-Fi. And also I sync collections in Lightroom Classic and they're boom on my phone. As long as I'm near Wi-Fi and they've downloaded, I've got all those images that were in whatever collection I wanted at my fingertips on mobile. And Lightroom mobile has gotten very powerful for editing. I don't know if people have been using it on tablets and phones, but it's incredible.
Yeah. So if you go into, can you see my screen?
Yes.
And you see the preferences window there?
No.
Let me try again. That come up now?
No. Just see the image and the blank borders. Unfortunately.
That?
Looked like something
for a
popped.
moment.
Oh, here we are. All right. You see that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So so this is Lightroom's preferences. This is not catalog preferences. This is Lightroom's preference. And there's a Lightroom sync tab. And down here, you just sort of say, specify the location for Lightroom synced images. And for me, I have it on one of my primary image drive, and it's in a folder called mobile images. And so every time something gets added, I could import images to my, raw images to my my tablet. I can import camera roll photos, and they automatically will go into that folder, in my collections. So anytime you do that, those photos get synced.
Yeah.
So, and the way, if I sync a raw file from my phone or my tablet, that raw file comes through to my Lightroom catalog when I open it up the next time. What Lightroom Lightroom Classic generally sends to the cloud are smart previews. So, which are fairly, they're basically like a super JPEG. So you can photos, I have portfolio collections on my iPad that people, I'll use Lightroom CC on my laptop when I'm out on the road, and I'll just import everything and then it'll come suck back up to Lightroom Classic when I'm back. Well, no, it doesn't quite work that way.
No.
Everything will come back in through sort of that back door, synced file. But I would tell people that if you're thinking about Lightroom CC, you should look at it, set up some collections in Classic that sync to the cloud. So when you open up Lightroom CC, you will see those collections synced. But they will be smart previews. If you click on it and click the info button, it will show you that it is a smart preview synced to the cloud. You want to play around with it and play around with the local tab, that's fine. But I would not suggest running both desktop versions, on multiple computers. I just would not.
No.
No. And the only other thing I'll say about the whole local tab is one of the other things that the web being a wonderful place for conspiracy theories was that what Matt and Brian Matisse and some other people were really saying was that Adobe is getting rid of Classic and it's going to go away, and it's time for you to start thinking about moving to this thing. And I just don't believe it.
No.
Do I see in 10 years that Classic might not exist? Well, yeah, but I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years either.
I think they'd have a revolt from professional photographers that use Lightroom Classic if they were to do that. I really do. We had a question in our questions that were submitted for this session. Someone saying, well, I've put photos in Lightroom Classic and now it says they're missing. How do I deal with that? And I think that is the biggest thing that Adobe deals with Classic, is that people aren't used to working with a database structure. Lightroom does not automatically know where your photos are. They know where you told them that they were. When you import, you have to import your images into Lightroom Classic's database, and you say, I'm going to take the photos off my camera card and I want you to copy them over to this drive. And in that process, you can rename them and add copyright information and even do some basic edits that you always want to do. You can apply an editing preset if you like that on every one of your images. You can do that all in the import process. And you say, I'm sending it to my master photo library 2024 Costa Rica workshop folder, then if you move that folder while you're outside of the Lightroom folder window, files window in the library, Lightroom's still going to go looking for it in your master photo library 2024 Costa Rica workshop folder. If you moved it in the Finder or Windows Explorer, some other location, it's going to come up with all the little previews that it built of what your currently edited photo looks like in that folder with a little exclamation point. And when you go to edit, it's going to say file is missing because you moved it outside of the database. Once you put it in there, the only way to move it is to open up Lightroom and go into files and click on those images and move them within Lightroom, so that it knows where they're moving, and it moves all the editing and the metadata and the collection information and all that stuff along with it. So that's where people get into trouble. They get into trouble moving outside of database. And I have a simple, formula that I've developed over the years for that. Rick's is different than mine, but I do have that master photo library folder with years underneath it and individual shoots underneath the years. That's my folder structure, and it's on my big network attached storage drive. It's 40 terabytes, and that's connected into my network at a very high speed. But when I'm out on the road, I use the second hard drive on my PC here, and I put the photos into that, and my catalog is always on this blue 2 terabyte Samsung SSD. That's my Lightroom catalog. Whether I plug that drive into my Mac back there, whether I plug it into my PC here or the other PC desktop I have out of sight over there, if I fire up Lightroom, it goes and looks in that drive and opens it up right where I was on the other computer with the image open in the editing position or organizing position or printing position I was in. I keep an incremental backup of that drive on this little drive right here. And at night, I would incrementally back up all the changes to that catalog. So I have a separate catalog drive here in the studio, backed up on my network attached storage, and one with me on the road. I have 2 drives in here, the same size as the drive, the Lightroom catalog drive, and the same size as my computer drive. And I just make sure that all the data on my computer drive is backed up and all the Lightroom catalog information on my catalog is backed up. I don't even use Adobe's backup feature in Lightroom. I just back up the drive.
Yeah.
And it works really, really well for me. And when I get home, I plug this computer into my 10 gigabit connection that is connected into the network attached storage, and I fire up Lightroom's files section in the library, and I click the folder on my computer's hard drive, and I drag it into the 2024 folder on the network attached storage over there, and I go get lunch. And when I come back, all my files are now in my master folder on the network attached storage. They're not on my hard drive. I can delete the one on my hard drive. It's copied over, or it actually moves it in Lightroom. And I can fire up the Mac back there and access it on the network attached storage. But you have to think about, I'm only going to move files around inside of Lightroom. I'm going to import my folders, my files into this structure and keep it in that structure. If I'm creating a JPEG to have printed or to send off to somebody in an email or to post on social media or to put into a video, I create temporary folders and I take the raw file that I've edited or the PSD if I've gone and done distraction removal and things in Photoshop. That's in my Lightroom Classic catalog, that master editing file. And I'll just say, export a copy 2,000 pixels on the long edge into this Dropbox folder or into my network attached storage drive where I can get it from any computer and I can upload, but I can throw that away. It's not part of my master file collection. It's a junk file. I can recreate that in a heartbeat by just clicking that photo again and saying export. You know, I send off little trash copies to do different things with. But the master photo structure, your editing files need to stay really sacrosanct and not move around if you're going to use that database system. That's if you've moved things and Lightroom's lost track of them, you're going to have to search your computer's drives for those file names, find them, and tell Lightroom where they are again. That's the only way to solve that problem if you're working with Classic. And those problems are simplified if you're going to use Adobe's cloud system and put your files up in their cloud and pay for the storage. They'll handle all that. So you won't be moving files around. You let Adobe handle that.
Al had a good comment, which I agree with to a point. Is that he says, you know, I'm uncomfortable, untrusting that my photos uploaded to the cloud would not be commandeered for building on AI tools and other forms of corporate piracy. Come up and Adobe has said, no, your photos are your photos. We don't touch them. The Sensei, the search system that they do, basically uses their database, but when it searches your photos, it's not adding them to their database. It's just, you know, but you know, how do we know that that doesn't change tomorrow? So
it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I mean, there's always that concern too. You know, I certainly would want my own private copies of my data. Not that I'm horrifically untrusting, but who knows? You know.
Yeah.
I'm pretty crazy when it comes to that. You know, we talked about I got a 40 terabyte network attached storage system over here. Well, that's backed up to big spinning drives over on the other PC that you guys can't see, and then those are backed up to come on, Backblaze.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an unlimited amount for a reasonable price per year. So, you know, I've got 2 copies of everything here in the studio, and then a third in the cloud. That, you know, it's like catastrophic insurance coverage.
Right. Let's see. We have a bunch of questions. A bunch of ones I think we've talked about. You know, Doug asked
do you
about
see this
print,
question? There was just a question
workaround.
based on what we were just talking about from Sibby in the office hours chat. Are you okay just jumping on that one really quick?
Yeah.
I think it's a great question that we talked about. If you have a Lightroom Classic, if you have files that you want to be edit on mobile that you've been working on in Lightroom Classic, you just need to put them in a collection. You can create a collection and then have that sync. And then you have Lightroom mobile on your tablet or your phone, boom, those will be there to edit.
Yeah, and if you edit them when you launch Classic next time, those edits will show up.
Yes.
You know, I think part of the confusion is that when Adobe came out with the cloud version, they named all of their mobile, you know, the phone and tablet version CC. So there's like Lightroom CC, and then you have Lightroom CC on the desktop, you know, Windows or Mac. And I think people got really confused by that. They're like, well, I have Classic. Where's my Lightroom Mobile Classic? And, you know, they're just basically tools that look to the cloud for how you're set up. It knows that you're syncing collections from Lightroom Classic, you know, and that those are smart previews in the cloud. They're connected to those collections. You know, when you import photos from, you know, your camera roll, or you import them onto your iPad into Lightroom, those then get synced back to your desktop. The full file gets synced back to your desktop because Lightroom Mobile understands that that's your system. You know, if you were using Lightroom CC, everything in the cloud is the version of the photo. Whether, I mean, if you shoot JPEG, they're JPEG. If you shoot RAW, they're RAW. You know, and the mobile versions just take advantage of the cloud and the way you've set them up. You know, if you create a bunch of albums in Lightroom CC because that's what you use, those albums show up in Lightroom Mobile just like collections show up in Lightroom Mobile from Classic people. So, you know, that's again where I feel like, you know, you don't it 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 it's possible, but I think it's really confusing to try and work with both Lightroom CC and Lightroom Classic on the desktop. I think you really do want to choose one.
And I think City just asked, she's confused about what gets loaded into the cloud, full file versus smart preview. If you sync a collection from Lightroom Classic into the cloud, it's really going to upload smart previews.
Right.
But those, you can export a smaller JPEG for sharing from, you know, the kind of thing you want on mobile. You can get a couple thousand pixels, right? And it's like a mini raw file essentially, and it saves all the metadata. And then the minute, like Rick said, that your mobile device is connected to Wi-Fi and you're back on it, you fire up Lightroom Classic, all those edits are going to sync through to the master file back in your collection, like you said. So it is going to translate right through to the whatever you do in editing on the mobile on the mobile file. It's all working through to that master file the minute you sync back. You can create a virtual copy and edit that differently if you want.
Yeah. And the I think one thing that is confusing, and I said it a couple times, and I hope I'm not confusing people, but if I shoot RAW on my phone with the Lightroom camera, or I just have it set up so that all my camera roll photos go into Lightroom. If I shoot RAW, what happens, and I'm a Classic user, what happens is those RAW files go up into the cloud. And then when I launch Classic the next time, they get downloaded to that mobile images folder that I showed you in the preferences. They get downloaded as the original RAW files.
Yes.
So that's the one exception to this routine, but it has to be that way, right? So if you're a Lightroom Classic user and you shoot RAW files, you don't want the RAW file only to be on your phone. You want the RAW file to be with your catalog on your desktop or wherever your photos are. So that has to be that way. So
I've gotten tired of paying Google more and more money to store all my mobile photos. So I shut off automatic backing up to Google Photos, which I love Google Photos, but I'm not syncing every photo that I take with my 50 megapixel cameras on this. And instead, it comes into Lightroom Classic. And when I love images, I just move them into folders alongside my big camera files, and then they can go into collections that are synced to Lightroom Mobile if I want, and I'm using my network attached storage instead of paying Google to hold that stuff in the cloud for me. Now I lose some of the amazing things that it does, like creating slideshows and birthday things and memories and all that stuff that Google or Apple do with your phone photos. But I'm also not constantly getting hit up for another $10 a month to increase my storage space, or they're going to shut down my email. No. So,
there was one question about you know, how do you increase your terabyte amount? Basically, if you open the Creative Cloud app on your desktop and you click the Your Account button, it will take you to a web page with, you know, where you can change your plan. So, you know, by default, I think you get something like 60 gigabytes or 10 gigabytes or something for the default plan. You can pay a little bit more for a terabyte.
Yeah, they have a new level, right? They have a terabyte level where you pay $20 a month instead of $10 a month, I think.
Except
you can just get Lightroom. Oh.
That is only Lightroom CC. You don't get Photoshop with that. Which is weird.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is weird.
Yeah.
Because you can still get the plan with Classic, CC, super limited data storage, and Photoshop for $9.99 a month. You just have to scroll down to it. It's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
I try hard when talking to people about the differences. I try hard not to, I mean, I clearly have a, you know, a preset negative feeling about CC.
Yeah.
You know, but I, you know, it can work for people. You know,
Yeah.
it can work. I mean, you know, if all you're doing is shooting with your phone, but you want to have the capability to edit stuff on your desktop and you want everything to be everywhere, you know, it probably not bad. And you just have to do a little bit more pruning if you start to get up to the point where you're running out of space.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like there's much more efficient ways to store images online. You know, this Backblaze, I mean, Hudson and I, our workflow for how our stuff is backed up is identical. You know, I have a NAS, I have a RAID system that backs up to Backblaze. I even still have offsite backups.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like I
It's
spend a
all
lot less
automated.
money. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there are reasons why people would want it, but I would say that, you know, our universe, you know, we deal with, you know, 100 people a year in workshops who almost all are using photo, you know, they're in that Photoshop Lightroom world and or on one.
Yeah.
And these are people with tens of thousands of photos.
Yeah.
And
If not hundreds.
yeah, you know, or thousands. I mean, thousands is, but I mean, it's like, you know, we're shooting insane amount. I mean, I can't imagine how many photos were taken on the Costa Rica workshop.
Yeah.
You know,
I was
you
culling
got,
in camera constantly and still have 9,000 images in
yeah,
the folder,
yeah,
you know.
you know, so you know, and one other thing that came up, you know, someone else was like, well, when I stop paying, you know, my images are held hostage, and that's not true in either case. You know, if you
Yeah.
suddenly say you're a Lightroom Classic user and you suddenly say, all right, I'm done paying you guys, Lightroom Classic will still run. You can still use all of the organizational stuff. You just basically the develop module and the map module. Why map? I don't know. Get disabled. But
Well, can you import? I don't think you can. Can you import?
Yeah, you can import. You just can't edit them in develop. You can't apply
Wow.
presets or any of that sort of stuff.
Huh.
But
So
all of
you
your
could edit
edits,
in another piece of software and import the results if you wanted.
yeah, yeah. You know, and if you're a CC user, basically you get, I believe it's a year to download the image. You can't edit them anymore, but they're still there for a year. And you have the option, you can literally go and select all or in small groups, you know, and do export and original and settings, and it'll export your original file and your XMP file. What I would really love is a way to just export the XMPs, but
Yeah.
you know, because nothing is synced back to your computer, you know, you've got to have both if for some reason you want to pay for a month or whatever, if you use Photoshop or something, you know, to have those settings that you applied to that photo. But
Yeah.
you can get your originals back pretty easily.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not going to just suddenly jerk the rug out from under you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jerry asked if there's a
Yeah.
limit on the number of photos or folders that Lightroom can handle. There used to be, up until like about 2010, 2012, it was something like, I mean, it was crazy. It was like, you know, 200,000 images, but they had people who had bigger collections than even my good friend
Yeah.
Hudson.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, my friend Duncan had 350,000 images in his Lightroom catalog when he
Yeah.
was shooting for TED. So,
I mean,
you know,
I would argue
realistically,
that the classic could be, or the CC could be really nice for people with a small collection who are very, you know, they're tight with their shooting, you know, not necessarily wildlife photographers, people
right.
who have a very, very fine, refined collection and they're really good with keeping it trimmed to right where they want it. And they want to be able to do all that high level AI, you know, organizing. or someone, you know, Tony Stark, you know, if you've got $1 billion, why not pay $300 a month for all? You just put them all in there, but keep them backed up at home. You know, in either case, I think you want a backup of your own, and it does require you to trust that they're not going to be at all misused. I don't have bad feelings about Adobe in that way. You know, I don't think they're selling your images to Getty on the sly or anything. Whether they get used in AI training, probably in-house. I don't
They
know.
say not. They have
They say
that,
not.
like I said, this came up a couple of years ago, and they were able to point to terms of service were such that your photos in your personal cloud were, you know, the searching algorithms were not using those for training purposes. They were using them to help you find the photos that you were looking for.
Okay.
You know, but you know,
Yeah, I mean, we don't know of them doing much evil. You know, they've been a good. Yeah.
all right.
So
Well,
that we know of.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Lots
And
of good input from everybody.
yeah, I think we have Hudson and I have some ideas about some ways to follow up for classic users. And so I think we'll continue to talk about this. And then, as I said, the next office hour is June 18th, and we got a bunch of really great questions that just we weren't going to be able to get in this hour, so I've saved them. I mean, I'll set up the next office hours page probably tomorrow. You know, if you want to just, you can resubmit it, or you can just, you know, sign up and say, hey, use my question from last time. We've saved them all.
Or give us a new one, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or give us a new one. Sort of just general Q&A, you know. I know that means there'll be a lot of Nikon questions. Someone wants to toss me the rare Sony question. I'm happy to answer it.
For anybody who sat through to this long point, I did in Costa Rica learn, for the Nikon faithful, everybody else can just hang up. I did in wildlife and sports shooters in particular, Z8, Z9 shooters in particular, I did learn some new little tricks with wildlife and action autofocus for the Z8 and the Z9 that I will be doing some training on, incorporating some yet more options for you out in the field, particularly for birds in flight, mixed with other kinds of shooting. So that will be coming, and I'm thinking about making my settings bin file available for the Z8 and Z9 to download for those who want to try that. So I think that'll be happening before too very long. So
okay. And just one more recap. If you're interested in potentially attending either next year's print workshops, Joshua Tree, Death Valley, or Costa Rica, send an email to rick@hudsonhenry.com indicating which ones you're interested in. I know it's easy to just say all, but really think about the ones that you think you could come on, and just send me that note, and I'll make sure that you get on the notification list. And we'll talk more about that next month. So, all right, everybody. Thanks,
have fun in
Darren.
Alaska, Ken. Hey, thanks, Darren. Thanks, Rick. Great meeting. See everybody soon.
Thank y'all.